All right, cool. So we are on Facebook Live. We'll give it one more minute here, and then we'll start letting everybody in.
We able to see who comes on Facebook Live through this or no?
Yeah, yeah.
Like on Zoom, I can see it.
Oh, not on Zoom. No,
Yeah.
not on Zoom. That's why I've got the other monitor to make sure that I can see that feed going.
Gotcha.
But I'm going to go ahead and let everybody in here right now. I think 10 or 15 people in the waiting room right now. So we'll see. And all right, cool, man. Here we go. All right. All right. Looks like everybody's coming in and getting situated. It's nice to see everybody. Brent, how are you, man? Merry Christmas to you. Can you hear me okay?
Hey, I'm here.
Good deal. Good deal. How's it going?
Really good.
Good.
I'm on a week vacation.
Okay.
Merry Christmas to you. Can you hear me okay? Merry Christmas to you.
Yeah, man. Absolutely. How was gliding the other night?
It was really good. So she's the scholarship's 30 flights, and most of them are like 20 minutes or less.
Okay.
But the other Sunday she was able to catch some lift, and she was up for about an hour.
Nice.
So
awesome.
she made it up to like 4,500 feet on a 3,000 foot tow. So it was good. It was really good.
That is amazing. Good. I love it. It's cool to follow that along. That's a really neat story. And just
yeah, so you may not see a whole lot of activity because Sunday was the last day of the season.
Okay.
So they won't start up again until March.
Okay.
But she's getting closer to her solo, and then she can take her private glider check ride on her 16th birthday with July 29th.
That's awesome.
She says, "That's where I'll be for my birthday." I said, "Okay, sounds good." and then I've decided to get my add-on.
Okay.
But I dare not do that before she gets her rating.
Yeah. Right. Exactly.
So
I'd say what's crazy is seeing the guys that go up out west. They'll just sit and follow the Rockies, and they'll stay up for like eight hours in a day. Is unbelievable.
It's crazy. Yep.
That's always crazy.
Out of Minden is where a lot of the competitions are.
Yeah.
And they just it's crazy.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah, that's cool. That is very cool. Well, thanks for joining us tonight. And I'm sorry I couldn't go. We couldn't get worked out with James the other day, but I hope we can.
Well, I let you guys bail first, and then I bailed so I could go to the glider port with Mia.
Nice. Yeah, it's an interesting world we're in, but trying to stay quote safe out there, I suppose.
Yep, and keep our families intact.
Yeah, exactly. No, this will be fun, and we got a few more people coming in here. What I'm going to do, and welcome everybody else. Thanks for joining tonight, and looking forward to this conversation with Michael. And what we're going to do, as always, is give ourselves a few minutes just to let everybody come in, get situated, and then we'll kick it off probably about 10 after. So feel free and say hello. Sukumar, I see you. You've got a new aircraft. Congratulations, brother.
Thanks, Gabe. I haven't had the opportunity to fly it much because of this weather.
Yeah, yeah, that's crazy. What an amazing aircraft you got, though. I love the color. It's super cool.
So there's actually a story behind it. My favorite color is blue, but I realized that unlike a car, you want to pick an airplane that can be seen against all kinds of backgrounds. So I did a little analysis and found out that the Bolt green that Cirrus was offered the best contrast. And my wife liked it, so I said, okay, that's it.
There you go. That's great.
Wait a minute. So there's a paint color that girls like, and that'll help you buy an airplane? That's what I need.
The best of both.
Best of both. That's awesome. Well, congratulations, man. That is super cool. And can't wait to see it sometime.
Yeah, I'm supposed to fly Thursday, but then the weather doesn't look good again. So we'll see.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been tough. The weather's been tough, but
Friday.
So there's an RV8 down at Culpeper that is a beautiful purple, and I'm sure that helped in the purchase process.
yeah. That's cool. And Mike Wolpole, I see you just took your commercial check ride today. I think did I just read that on Facebook like 20 minutes ago?
Yeah, I finally got home and posted it. So yeah, I passed it this afternoon.
Good for you,
It's
man.
actually, this was a retest. So last Tuesday is when I did the check ride. Now, I don't know if you remember, but it was AirMet for low level wind shear. Winds for 330, 14 gusting 23, and we were using runway 4 at Culpeper. It was fun.
Yeah.
And I probably would have passed the thing last Tuesday, but on the power off 180, I'm on downwind. I'm thinking, yeah, I'm getting low. I better turn base, and I turned base, and when you got up in the air, basically you had a 30 knot tailwind. Well, when you got a 30 knot tailwind, it's like boom, you're over the runway. Shoot. So from there, it just I overshot. So
Gotcha.
That was your commercial ride?
yeah,
Well, congrats on passing.
thanks.
Yeah.
Did you feel like that was easier or harder than the other ones so far?
Different.
Different, yeah. I've always found a lot of people end up thinking that the commercial is actually one of the easier of the ones, because more like it depends on how recent your private was, but the commercial is kind of like an addition to your private. Really, it's like a private advanced private pilot, pretty much.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of like how instrument makes you more precise with your flying skills and getting from A to B.
Yeah.
I think commercial kind of steps up your skills with controlling the airplane.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. How about those 8s on pylons? Did you have to do those on the check ride?
Yeah, I did that with, like I said, I did that with a 35 knot wind at altitude.
Yeah, that's pretty good if you're able to do those at that kind of wind.
Yeah, it was like at some point we were figuring, we're damn near going to hit the ground before, going into the wind. There's so much wind.
Yeah. Down at 400 feet.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, literally there was like 50 knot difference downwind and upwind. It was crazy.
Yeah, it's insane. Well, congratulations.
So
Yeah.
did you stop the check ride the first time and then continue?
No, we actually did the whole check ride, and basically it came down to the last thing was the power off 180. And like I said, I turned too soon, and even though I slipped the living bejesus out of it, I couldn't get it slowed down and stopped. So we ended up overshooting by about 200 or 300 feet.
So was that the only portion you had to retake?
Yeah, he wanted to see all the landings again. So we basically went out today and did the takeoffs and landings just to go through them again. And it ended up, I did a soft field takeoff, soft field landing, a short field takeoff, and a power off 180. And I put the power off 180 right in the middle of the box with the stall horn screaming.
So Mike, who was the DPE?
Steve Nixon.
I don't know Steve. I don't think.
So yeah, I just met him, obviously a week ago, and real matter of fact guy. Doesn't really fool around much. There's not a lot of chit chat. You go, the oral was about an hour and a half, and touched on everything. I mean, went slamming right through it, and all business. Kind of in a way, kind of threw me a little bit on the check ride the first time, but this time I knew what to expect with him. So,
Right. That's good. Well, good. Again, congratulations, man. I know you've been working with that, so good job. Well done.
Congratulations.
yeah,
So-
this is just, so I got some issues. Wouldn't be easy for me to get a second class medical. So, well, actually it might be easy, but it might sit in Oklahoma City for 2 to 3 months, which means no flying. Because when you apply for a new medical, it supersedes your previous one. So this is just basically to get me, you have to be commercial rated to do CFI. So that's what's next.
No, that's cool. So we're just about 10 minutes after, and we've got a few other people have joined, and I think we're good on Facebook. I'm a little perplexed right now. We've got somebody whose name is Smokehouse wanting to come in. So wonder who that is. So,
Who be that?
I'm always a little concerned when I don't recognize maybe the full name. Anyways, I hope everybody's doing well. It's a pleasure for all of us to kind of get back together again. It's been a few weeks since we had a last call, and I know there's been a few FAA webinars recently as well. So if you haven't tuned into those, there's going to be another one coming up on, I believe they're doing them the second Wednesday of every month, as far as a DC SFRA refresher course. So if you are interested in that and are flying around the area, definitely encourage you to sit in on that. John Somiak did give me the slide decks from last time, so they're on the website, so you can pick up all that information too if you need it. So with that said, we are going to go ahead and get started here with Michael Fiedler. I'm thrilled that we could have him online tonight because Michael and I met, I don't know, was it a month ago maybe? As a result of some online stuff. I got lucky, and all of a sudden we were able to go on a flight in the J3 Cub, and we ended up recording a podcast together. And so, really learning about Michael along the way and his business with Shenandoah Tailwheel Adventures. Absolutely amazing stuff what you're doing over there in Martinsburg, man. So keep it up. Thrilled that you can join us here. And I know that you mentioned you met a bunch of Smokehouse pilots before you even before we even met. So I think that's awesome coming over there to get the checkout on the Tailwheel. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you, brother. And thank you again for doing this and sharing your knowledge with Seaplane Flying with us.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate it. Yeah, it's funny. There's a Smokehouse in this area. I'm relatively new up here. I grew up in Purcellville actually, and moved down to Florida and did a lot of flying down there and traveled all over the world doing a lot of fun flying and mostly teaching. Honestly, I've got a little over 2,000 hours of dual given now. And I'd say about 70% of that has been backcountry and seaplane kind of instruction. And so moving back up here, once again, like I said, I grew up here, but haven't been flying around here for since high school, really. And next thing I know, all my students doing their tailwheel checkouts are all talking about Smokehouse. It was one after the next. And next thing I know, it's you guys are running the show up here. It's pretty awesome.
I don't know about that, but thanks.
No, it really is. It's awesome. So. But yeah, so obviously we're gonna be talking about seaplane flying today, but what we'll kind of start out just talking about basics of seaplane flying and kind of work our way into, honestly, we'll just have a conversation towards the end and talk about backcountry stuff, or if you guys have any questions about seaplanes specifically or how to get into seaplanes, then we'll do that too. Is anybody on here already a rated seaplane pilot? All right, Johnny. Anybody else? Can't see everybody, but well, awesome. So Johnny, what's your experience with seaplanes? You're muted, brother. There you are.
All right. Yeah, I'm sent for work up to Maine, and I was up there for extended periods of time, and I said, there's a seaplane base up here. Let me see what they got going on. It turned out to be Twitchell's.
Yeah, sure.
And I signed up for their weekend course to take the weekend course, and I was going to fly Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and I figured check ride Monday. And I showed up on Saturday for one of my lessons, and Mike Twitchell, the owner of the company, was there. He said, I'm going to sit in for your instructor today and just kind of give you like a stage check or something. And I said, okay. So we went out and flew, and I did whatever he asked me to do. We came back in, and I walked up to the desk, and he comes out from behind the office, and he says, he heard me trying to arrange a time for one of the seaplanes to do some solo practice. And he said, what are you doing? I said, I'm trying to line up. I'm going to go to town, get some lunch, and then I'm going to come back and rent a plane and go do some solo practice before I get ready for the check ride. And he says, no. He says, the examiner's on the way. He's going to be here in 15 minutes. Your check ride. So Sunday I did my check ride, or Saturday, and went out and did fine with it and got signed off.
So you were a one-day seaplane pilot, huh?
2 days.
2 days, Friday and Saturday.
Saturday.
Okay, well that's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, that's so how many hours did it take you? And were you at like around 4 or 5 hours?
I don't remember how many it was now. I flew 4 or 5 flights with 2 different instructors.
Sure.
One of them was a guy that he had been a part owner of McCall's Flying Service in Idaho before he moved to Maine with his new wife. So he had a lot of backcountry experience, and he was really good. And,
that's awesome.
So after that, they rent you the plane. I kept going back up there, and I kept renting the plane every time I went into town. It was only 15 minutes from where I was working. So I used to take guys from work, say, hey, let's go fly a seaplane after work.
That's awesome. Was that, I can't remember, was that you we were talking about on Facebook? I was talking on Facebook about that, how Twitchell's is no longer renting that 172 out.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, it's sad. Yeah, I heard they stopped. I think it was a year or 2 ago they stopped renting it out.
Yeah.
But
somebody rented one time when I was up there. When I went out there after a break, and I went back to rent one, and they had one that was down for maintenance, and somebody had taken it out and put a 9-inch gash in the float.
Awesome.
Yeah,
it's tough. That's everybody's struggle, is once you get your seaplane rating, what do you do with it afterwards? Because you can't rent them anywhere. You can't just go down the street to the local flight school and pick up a seaplane. Not to mention, if they did have one, the insurance is outrageous, so they probably wouldn't let you fly it anyways.
And at the time that they were doing that, during the winter time, they were doing, the guy had Mike Twitchell had his own 185, a Skywagon. And in the wintertime, they put it on skis and do ski lessons and do ski sign-offs. And then they quit doing that because the insurance was too high on it.
Yeah. Yeah, I've got my my J3 out here, and I'd love to get it on skis, but I was talking to insurance about it the other day, and it would jack up my price. It would almost double my price to put it on skis. It's unbelievable.
They were doing, I did mine in 172s on floats. Tired old 172s, man.
Yeah.
They did fine. I mean.
Yeah, was it 160 horsepower?
Yeah.
Yeah, the 172, when you put them on floats, they turn it. They're already kind of a dog on land. Then you put floats under them, and they're definitely a dog.
Yeah. The one thing I thought was neat about the whole experience was we went out on. They were based on a river up there, so you got some experience on a river, but it was all a long, straight stretch with some curves in it, of course. But
yeah.
But you get off the ground or off the water surface, you take off, you get to about 100 feet, and then you chop the throttle and do a landing.
Yeah.
Power off, take off again, chop the throttle and do another landing. In half an hour, you could get 20 landings in.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, I taught down at Jack Brown Seaplane Base, and within basically a 7-mile radius of the seaplane base, there's somewhere, it's like 60 or 70 lakes within just about a 7-mile radius. So it's pretty much the same thing. You take off and it's like just one landing after the next, you know?
Oh yeah.
You spend an hour and a half in the plane and you end up with literally 25, 30 landings easily.
Oh, easily.
So that's a lot of fun. That's awesome. Well, cool. So let's go ahead. I'm going to pull up, let's see here.
Hey, Michael, whenever, just so you know, when you're in this, I'm going to probably step away for maybe 5 minutes to go see Cliff fly by, and then I'll be right back. But just to let you know.
No worries. No worries. Awesome. So let's talk about some seaplanes here. So what's kind of funny, seaplane pilots are notorious for being, I don't know if I should say this publicly or not, but they're kind of I kind of describe them as like the potheads of the sky. You know, the way we fly seaplanes is very lackadaisical, and it really carries into, and I don't want to say lackadaisical in the sense that we don't care about certain things. There's still a lot of methodical you know, thinking that goes into what we do, but there is definitely you know, before we start the presentation, you'll see a lot of things. There's not a lot of technical terms for seaplanes, and so anyways, so what it ends up being is you just kind of fly by the seat of your pants, no matter what kind of plane you're in, whether you're in you know, a J3 or you're in you know, a Beaver or even a Twin Otter. It really is flying by the seat of your pants. There's not many you know, tools really that can help you land on the water other than your butt. So it's definitely seat of the pants flying to the pretty much to the fullest extent. Whether you're in a 172 or a J3, I'm sure your experience in the 172 was the same. They taught you fly by the feel, not by what the instruments are telling you. Because I tell you what, when you put a plane on the water does a number to those planes. I mean, the water gets in the pitot tubes, and then your airspeed indicator is not reading accurately. And there's all kinds of issues that end up resulting from that. And so it really does become seat of your pants flying. So what we'll talk about here today, we're going to start out with talking about components of a float. We'll break down a float and discuss what makes the float work and why all the components are so important. Taxiing a seaplane is actually something to talk about. Obviously, when you're talking about a land plane, there's not much to it. You just follow the center line and taxi out to wherever you want to go. But when it comes to a seaplane, there's a lot more to take into consideration than just following the yellow line. Normal operations, just takeoffs and landings on very normal conditions, an average day. Rough water operations. Rough water is, you know, if you have bigger waves out there, you need to take that into consideration so you don't damage the floats or the airframe for that matter. And so that definitely is a pretty important piece of seaplane flying. Glassy water operations, number 5, what we'll talk about. Glassy water is the sore subject in seaplane flying. That is where 90% of your accidents happen in seaplanes is going to be on glassy water. And in a lot of them don't fare well for the pilots. A lot of times it results in death. You touch down at high speeds, flipping planes over and all kinds of bad stuff happen there on glassy water. So that is definitely a sore subject. And when I'm teaching, that's definitely my heavy or special emphasis area. Confined areas. Confined areas are, you know, we'll talk about how to get in and out of a small lake or a pond, right? Depending on what kind of plane you're flying, you might better make it into some of those little ponds, or even some tight little rivers, whatever it is. Traffic pattern. There is some differences between a seaplane traffic pattern and general land flying. Mainly because you don't have a runway, you have to kind of craft your own runway and make do with that. And then parking, there's a few different types of parking. I kind of pair them together into two different techniques, docking and mooring. I pretty much use the same techniques when I'm docking and mooring, as well as ramping and beaching. Those are also pretty much the same technique as well. All right, so this is a float here. So we're going to break it down. Let's start with, can you guys see my cursor here or no? You can. All right. So we'll start from the left, work our way across the top, then come back to the front left and go across the bottom here. Starting with the top, the front there, we have the bow of a float. The bow of a float, if any of you are boaters, it's literally just the front of the float. It doesn't necessarily mean anything other than the front. Next on there, we have the mooring cleat. Mooring cleat is what you're going to tie your ropes to dock the plane, or if you want to hold it in place, tie an anchor, whatever you're doing. We typically have 2 of those, one on the front, one on the back. Sometimes you have some in between, depending on the size of your plane. The deck is simply what you're going to walk on up here. All right. Bulkheads. Bulkheads are probably the most critical, or at least second most critical component on a float. What you have inside of a float is there's separate compartments. This particular float has 7 different compartments. That's actually pretty average number is 7. Legally, you have to have at least 4 compartments. And of those 4 compartments, 2 can be flooded, and the float legally still has to remain above the water. It cannot be fully submerged yet. So you think about that, 50% of your float can be flooded, and it still legally has to be designed to stay above the water. You're not going to be taken off with that, but you will at least better make it to shore. What those bulkheads do is they divide up your compartments and prevent the water. Say one of them does leak, they prevent the water from sloshing around in there, shifting that center of gravity around too much. That does become a pretty severe hazard. Especially in metal floats versus composite. Composite floats, more modern type of float, is going to have it's all one part, one piece. It doesn't leak quite as bad. Versus the metal floats, I use a saying we have in metal floats, you have 1,000 holes full of rivets. In other words, they flood, right? They have a lot of holes and they're going to leak. So when they do leak, these compartments just keep them, or the bulkheads just keep them from the water from sloshing around too much. Next up, we have the bilge pump opening, or the hole, whatever you want to call it. Essentially, inside of each compartment, you have a hose. It literally looks like, if you were to take it out, it looks like a garden hose, and it just goes down to the bottom of your compartment. And what you do on top, you have these little holes up here. They're plugged up with a plug. It looks like a nipple from a baby bottle, or cork, depending on what type of float you have. Take those out. You got a hole, and you pump it out. You can either pump it out manually, or you have electric pumps as well, and create a vacuum and suck out whatever water does leak. It's that's part of every pre-flight on a seaplane should be to pump out the floats, make sure that all the water gets out. They do flood. Handhole covers, what you get on top of the float on the deck here is they're essentially like a plate, about big enough for your arm to get inside of, so you can do some maintenance without taking the whole float apart. Say one of these hoses inside get busted, cracked, broken, fall off, whatever. You don't want to take the entire float apart to get down to that. So those are simply just our little maintenance holes or manholes. Finally, the back, you have the stern, which is the opposite of the bow. It's just the back of the float. Coming down on the bottom now, starting over here, we have our bumper. On the front of our floats, you have depending on the size of the floats, you have, 4 to 6 inch rubber literally bumper on the front of your float. It's there designed essentially so that if you were to hit something head on, you're not going to tear up your floats too bad. We do not use that on a general day. We're not going to run into a dock head on because of a bumper. It's not designed necessarily for that. It's simply there in case you do happen to end up head on with something. Is anybody a boater? Couple? Awesome. So in a boat, how important is it that you have a keel on the boat? What happens if you don't have a keel? Have you ever driven a boat that doesn't have a keel? You look at like a bay boat or the skiffs and stuff like that they're using down in was it Swamp People, where they're fishing for alligators and stuff, right? If you watch those boats make sharp turns, they're literally just sliding around out there. It's very hard to make those sharp turns. So what this keel does here is literally gives us longitudinal stability, so we can maintain a straight line, and kind of helps you keep that longitudinal stability. Next, we have the chine. The chine is literally on a metal float anyways. It is a line that allows the top and side of the float to be connected to the bottom of the float via rivets. You've got a ton of rivets down a chine that goes the full length of the float. Sister keelsons. What they look like is extensions of the keel. They're essentially, you have one on either side of the keel going up, a foot or two, paralleling the keel. And what they actually do is drive water down and away from the keel. In a seaplane, that's important. What that does is give us hydrodynamic lift. It allows the float to sit on top of the water at higher speeds so we can get less drag. The less of the float that's in the water, the less drag there is on it. Sister keelsons. The step. The step is probably the most important component of the float. Hang on just a second. I'm trying out this new technology here. See if I can get this working. I'm just going to use my computer here. There we go. Cool. All right. So what the step is, there we go. All right. You guys still see me in now? So what the step is, what you have about halfway down your float is a ridge. Now it looks like literally a step. Now that step, what it does, if you look at the shape of a float, can anybody tell me what it looks like, what it might remind them of in terms of aviation? That's your little hint there. Anybody? The general shape of a float, what does it look like?
Wing.
Upside down wing.
A wing, exactly. So it looks like when you flip it right side up, an upside down wing, right? So what you have on the top, or the bottom, I should say, of your float, you have a low pressure system being built. On the top of the float, you have high pressure. High wants to go to low, it sucks the airplane down into the water. All right, so what this step actually does, if anybody in here is a jet pilot or has flown anything with spoilers, that step acts as a spoiler and breaks that surface tension of the water. It creates a little air pocket between the water and your float and allows the float to break the surface tension and get off the water. It is probably the most critical component on a float. Without it, we would not lift off of the water. As you get more speed, you're creating more surface tension, and that airplane would not lift off the water. All right. Figure this out again. All right. And oops. The next thing we have is the skeg. The skeg is simply an extension of your keel. When you're up on the step, we call it the step. It's a high-speed taxi. You end up on top of the water. Quite literally, you're sitting on only about 3 or 4 feet of your float. What that means is you have less of your keel in the water, so you have less longitudinal stability. So what that skeg is basically, it's essentially an extension of your keel to give you that longitudinal stability at higher speeds when you have less float in the water. Finally, on the back, you have water rudders. Water rudders are how we steer at low speeds. When you don't really have rudder authority, obviously we don't have a nose gear out there to steer us around in the water. So those rudders, water rudders, act as our steerable nose gear there, or tail wheel for that matter. Taxiing on the water. Taxiing on the water brings some pretty significant challenges, and in fact, you could argue that on a windier day, taxiing is actually the most challenging part of a seaplane. We can always land into the wind. We can always take off into the wind. Why? Because we don't have a real runway. We can always adjust as needed for that. But you can't always choose where you're trying to taxi to. If you have to make it to a dock or a ramp, or a beach for that matter, and you want to park the plane, you can only do so much about the wind. So taxiing is definitely the most challenging part, in my opinion, of a seaplane. The first challenge we have is there are no brakes. Okay. Second challenge is that the airplane wants to weather vane. In other words, it wants to point into the wind on its own. There are 3 different types of taxiing. You have the idle taxi, step taxi, and the plow turn. Some people will call this a plow taxi. Personally, I'm against calling it a plow taxi. It's more or less a turn, and it's only, in my mind, to be used as more or less in an emergency situation. We said we don't have brakes. So what that means that we don't have brakes, or what do you do if you're going to run into something? Not much. All you can do is shut it down, shut the engine down. In a seaplane, if you're talking about, say you get to right here, you're going to hit this little tree right there in the water. Only thing you can do is shut it down. Quickest way to shut down an engine is with the mags, not with the mixture. I know a lot of people are against shutting down an engine with the mags, and typically I am as well. However, you're talking about, you want to get that engine killed as quick as possible, turn the mags off. That way, when you do hit the tree or say a boat with other people in it, you're not hitting them with a moving, spinning propeller. You don't want to chop up people. That doesn't end up good. All right. So once again, think ahead, right? If you don't have brakes, you got to be thinking farther ahead of the airplane than what you're used to thinking. So I say usually a minimum 30 seconds ahead of the airplane. Don't be looking down at the water right in front of the plane. Look down the lake. Look at the backside. Look at all your surroundings and use your peripheral vision. Weather vaning. Weather vaning is the natural tendency of a seaplane to want to point into the wind. What you have on a seaplane versus a land plane is what I call the center of buoyancy, CB. Your center of buoyancy essentially is your pivotal point. It acts like your center of gravity on the ground or in the air. Okay. Your center of buoyancy, basically buoyancy is going to be opposing your gravity in this case, but it is your pivotal point on the airplane. Let's say on my plane right here, it's right about here, right above the cockpit. Now, from here, we have 2 arms. You have an aft arm and a forward arm. Which arm is going to have the greatest surface area? Anybody? Probably the aft arm, right? So what happens if the wind's coming from you guys hitting the side of my airplane? That aft arm is going to act like a sail. The wind's going to push it back and around, pivoting around our center of buoyancy and pointing us into the wind. All right. You might see it kind of teeter-totter back and forth, but eventually it will find itself right into the wind. The challenging part of this in the seaplane, this happens on to tailwheel aircraft as well. The challenging part to it versus tailwheel and seaplane is that it'll happen to you at 3 knots of wind. You can't do anything about it. And once again, you don't have brakes to fight it. So we are out there. It's very crucial that you're using your crosswind corrections at all times on the water, so that the wind does not bully you around too much. First type of taxi we have is the idle taxi. Idle taxi, in my mind, is the safest way to taxi. It's what I'm doing. I would say I'm doing the idle taxi 90% of the time I'm on the water. Okay. The idle taxi is essentially you're sitting there taxiing around just as it says. Your throttle's at idle, or in my mind, below 1,000 RPM. It doesn't really matter which airplane you're in. I've never flown an airplane where I could put the throttle above 1,000 RPM. Okay. Your water rudders are down. That gives you the most control. You can make turns pretty much on a dime, depending on how well your water rudders are connected to your rudder pedals. And your elevator is full aft. So by bringing your elevator full aft, what that does, even at idle, especially at on some of these bigger airplanes with more horsepower, it brings the nose up just a little bit. Even at idle taxi, it brings that nose up. Say it's just a few inches. The benefit to this is as our propeller is spinning over the water, we're getting a lot of kickback from the water. Okay, we call it prop spray. That prop spray is terrible on our seaplanes. It ends up eating up our propellers. If you ever go find a seaplane, feel the propeller, the leading edge of the prop, and I guarantee you it's going to have a bunch of nicks in it. It literally, that water against the propeller, you might as well be pulling up concrete or rocks into your propeller. It's really bad. So by bringing that nose up, you're doing just a little bit of protection. You're getting a little bit of clearance between the water and your propeller. The pros, once again, of idle taxi, it's a safe speed. We don't have brakes, so the slower we go, the better we are. We do have low prop spray, good engine cooling. Obviously, you don't have a high power setting. The only con to it is that it is very slow. When I say slow, I mean, you think about taxiing in a land plane, you're doing walking speed. But truly, in a seaplane, you'd be lucky to be going as fast as you'd be walking. So at idle, you're going real slow. All right. Step taxi. Step taxi is the fastest way to taxi. Essentially, what you're going to do to perform the step taxi from idle taxi, you're going to go ahead and give it full throttle with your elevator still full aft. As you accelerate in the airplane, let's see if I can get a better view of this here. There we go. So as your airplane begins to accelerate, you're going to get two rises in the nose. The first rise is the floats pushing the water out of the way. The second rise is going to be the most nose high that you can get a seaplane on the water. At that time, if you go back to neutral elevator or depending on the plane you're in, a little bit of forward elevator, the airplane's going to prop itself up and on top of the water. And that's what we were talking about earlier, why you need that when you need that skeg. When you're sitting on literally the top of the water, you have only a few feet of the float in the water at that time. Least amount of drag, best acceleration. This is also how you take off. Once you get your nose back down to our normal attitude, bring your throttle back to about the midway point. Depends on the airplane. The RPM settings do change. Somewhere around 2,000 typically works for a starting point in most planes, though. And you can just cruise around. You're doing, honestly, pretty high speed. You can get going, depending on the plane you're in, anywhere from 30, 35 miles an hour all the way up to, I've been in some planes where you're cruising around. I think the Mal 235 was the fastest plane I've step taxied in anyways, and you're doing 55 plus miles an hour on the water. It's a fast little speedboat out there. So you can make turns left, right, whatever you need to do in the step taxi, but you do have to be careful about it. Because as you turn, you're creating side load. The airplane does want to flip. So I'd say, and anybody else that has done any seaplane flying would probably concur. The step taxi is probably the most unnatural feeling that you'll ever get in an airplane. As you make these turns, you get this centripetal force that wants to flip the airplane out. So you're creating intentional side load in an airplane. Super strange feeling. You can make turns, like I said, left, right, whatever you need to do. However, the one turn I do stray away from is downwind, back upwind. So what happens as you're taxiing upwind, wind's once again coming from you guys head on this airplane here. As I turn to the left here, I have centripetal force wanting to flip the airplane outside the turn always, okay? Moving outside. That wind is counteracting that centripetal force, keeping the airplane squared on the water. As I continue my turn downwind and I'm going back upwind, now centripetal force wants to flip the airplane outside the turn. Still, that wind is going to only aid in flipping the airplane over at that point. So I'll do them in calm winds, back upwind, but if there's any serious winds at all, I'm definitely not doing a step turn back upwind. And once again, if you think about it, step taxi, you're going faster, therefore your turning radius is going to be a lot greater as well. So generally the fastest way and the safest way to turn downwind back upwind is to stop the airplane and let it just weather vane, just do an idle turn back around into the wind. What you'll find is that the wind on a seaplane, if you can only fight it so much, eventually you have to learn to use the wind to your advantage. And once you can do that, you kind of master the seaplane. Once you can stop fighting the wind and only use it to your advantage. You'll see that is definitely, if any of you ever get in a seaplane that haven't already been in a seaplane, that is truly going to be, your biggest challenge would be trying to accept the winds for what they are and using the proper techniques to overcome them. The next thing we have is a plow turn. I did say this is, in my mind, this is meant to be used really in an emergency. It's when nothing else will work. There's very rare a time in a seaplane, modern day seaplane, where we have two water rudders on the back, where I'm out there and I cannot make a turn upwind to downwind. Where, in other words, the weather vaning tendency is so great that I cannot turn back downwind. I try to start my turns, but the airplane just wants to weather vane and pull it right back into the wind. With two water rudders, that's very rarely an issue, but it can be an issue. Say you end up in a gust front or something, you got these really strong winds out, you need to get turned around. Or say you got a jammed water rudder, or both your water rudders are jammed up. How do you get turned back around in these windier days? The history of it, actually, of the plow turn was back in the day, if you guys ever see any old videos of people flying Cessna 140s and stuff on floats, they only had one water rudder, usually on the right or left float. Now with one water rudder, you have quite literally very, very little maneuverability on the water. And so what ends up happening is the winds just bully you around and there's only so much you can do. So they developed this plow turn. The concept is, if you remember back to our weather vaning, right, your center of buoyancy is your pivotal point. It's up here towards the front of the airplane. Okay. From here, your aft arm is the greatest arm. That's what causes the airplane to want to point nose into the wind always. Now, what if we can get that center of buoyancy aft? What if we can get it far back here so that the greater arm is the front arm, and once again, we can let the winds work with us, not against us, or actually reverse that weather vaning tendency. Can anybody guess how we could get our center of buoyancy from up here back to here? Any ideas? Anything? Nothing? So if I was to bring my nose up and say that this front part of my float where my center of buoyancy was, let's say that that is now out of the water. Okay, well, where's my center of buoyancy now? If that's not even in the water anymore, my center of buoyancy just shifted aft me. So now it's somewhere in the tail section of my airplane. The greater surface area is now the front arm. The weather vaning tendency has now reversed in this situation. So by bringing my nose up, I want the airplane to turn itself around and downwind. Okay. So from an upwind position, you're going to go give it a bunch of power, somewhere between 3/4 throttle and full power, with the stick full aft or the yoke full aft. Bring the nose up, get that center of buoyancy as far back as you can get it. Be patient with this. Make sure the nose is as high as you can possibly get it. All right. Once you feel comfortable that that nose is far enough up, start your turn. And what you're going to find is that wind is actually going to continue to push you around on its own. You don't have to do anything at that point other than apply a little rudder. Okay. Once you get downwind, make sure you stop on the downwind. Otherwise, you're going to continue to weather vane back right around. It's going to win you over again, the lovely wind, and you're going to end up pointing back the wind. So just taxi back exactly downwind, and you can overcome those strong winds out there. Once again, very rarely am I using that on an average day in a seaplane or even an average windy day in a seaplane. Typically, even a J3 Cub, I mean, I'm thinking, the lightest plane I've flown, a Cub, I could probably get out there with 2 water rudders and a good set of floats. I could probably get out there in 20 knots of wind and still make a full 180 in an upwind to downwind situation. So, like I said, I mean, you shouldn't be flying a J3 Cub and honestly much more than 20 knot winds. That's already a significant amount for that. So, yeah, the cons to this are obviously poor visibility, right? High angle of attack, you can't see in front of you anymore. So that is definitely a con. The other couple, you have poor engine cooling, right? Nose is super high, so not a lot of airflow getting in that cowling there. And then finally, a ton of prop spray. Because you're at a low power setting here, or excuse me, a high power setting, low speed, your prop spray is literally directly underneath your propeller, kicking up as much water as you can imagine, eats up your props. And if you're flying anything other than a J3, your propeller is going to be expensive, protected at all costs, right? You get in a 185 or something, and you're looking at a very, very expensive overhaul on that propeller. All right, let's get into the flying. Any questions on taxiing, anybody? No? Cool. So a normal takeoff in a seaplane, honestly, guys, is about as easy as taking off in a tricycle gear airplane. There's not that much to it. It kind of flies itself off the water if it's done right. Starting out with stick full lap, we're kind of going to treat it as though we're going to do this step taxi here. We're going to go full power, and you're going to get those 2 rises in the nose again. The first one is the initial floats pushing the water out of the way. The second one's the most nose high you can get your seaplane. That's really your plow attitude. At that time, neutral elevator, sometimes a little bit of forward elevator. Get the airplane up and on top of the water. Least amount of float in the water, least amount of drag, best acceleration. At that time, you're going to hold your attitude, whatever attitude in that plane feels comfortable. The airplane's going to fly itself off the water. If you apply too much back pressure too early, you're going to create more drag. You're adding more float into the water. The airplane's not going to lift off the water. It's going to stay there. All right. It's actually going to slow it down. You can feel it in your butt. It will slow down. If you apply too much forward pressure, the exact same thing happens. You're digging the front of the floats in, and you end up with more drag. It will not lift off. So kind of feel it out. Eventually, the airplane's going to lift itself off and fly itself right off the water. And at that time, you can fly whatever climb speeds you need to fly at. There's not many seaplanes that I can think of that are going to have a VR. There's really no rotation speed. It's whatever works. And you'll see on a windier day, you pop off the water at really low speeds, and on a super calm day, on the glassy water days we'll get to soon, you could end up taking 3-4 times as much distance as a normal day. Landing a seaplane is, once again, it's pretty simple. If any of you are tailwheel pilots, a normal landing is the closest thing to it is a 3-point landing. All right, it's a pretty docile landing. Typically, unless I'm in a beaver or something a little bit heavier, I'm going to be power idle as soon as I know that I can make it to my water or my landing point. Okay, and I'm going to glide to my landing over my landing point. At that time, I'm going to level off about 6 to 10 feet above the water. Once I level off, my power's already idle, so all I'm going to do is hold the airplane off the water as long as I can until eventually we get either a stall or we hit the water. Now, a seaplane slows down pretty much on its own in a very short distance, but hold stick full lap. It's going to keep that prop away from the water once again. Okay. Normal operations, honestly, in terms of actually flying, I haven't had a student that couldn't get normal landings and takeoffs in a pretty short amount of time. They're not too difficult. All right. Rough water. So rough water is essentially, it is any condition where body of water that has, larger waves that are probably going to be, you're going to be in for a rude awakening when you hit it. These waves do cause some damage to the rigging on your floats, as well as the floats themselves. You end up taking on a lot more water when you land on this rough water as well. Our concerns, what we're looking out for, the reason why this is we have specific techniques for the rough water. We said potential airframe damage. And the other concern we need to be looking out for when we're performing rough water, especially the takeoff, we're lifting off at low speeds. It's kind of like a soft field takeoff in regards to that. Make sure you get in ground effect and use that to your advantage because you are lifting off very low speeds. It's a little video of some rough water in a J3. Those are probably somewhere in the 16 to 18 inch wave range. In a J3, that's pretty much maxing out. Most floats that you can put on a Cub, that's pretty much maxing out the wave size. The wave size does vary depending on the not just the floats, or not just the airplane, but also the floats you're running. A lot of the more modern floats, you have whip lines and things like that you'll see them running on commercial operators like caravans and stuff, and they'll cut through 2-foot waves, kind of no problem actually. But typically, you're not looking at anything that large. It really depends on the shape and the size of the hull. Makes a huge difference there. Rough water takeoff. So a rough water takeoff is, once again, it's actually pretty simple. It is more or less a normal takeoff with a little bit extra back pressure on the elevator. So what you're going to get, once again, full power, first rise, second rise out of the nose. Once you reach that, you're going to relax the elevator just enough to get back to your first rise attitude. And what that does is it creates a little bit extra lift. But you're also using the waves to your advantage. In this attitude, as you hit the waves, you're getting more separation under the float between the waves, kind of similar to, or acting as, more steps. So you're getting more air underneath the float. The more air you have under the float, the easier it is to accelerate and fly. So you're pitching up. As soon as you feel the airplane pop off the water, oftentimes, more often than not, you hit a big wave and it kind of knocks you up into the air. At that time, level it off, use your ground effect to your advantage, and you can just cruise on out from there once you pick up your speed. Landing. A rough water landing, once again, very similar to a normal landing with the exception. If any of you are tailwheel pilots, this is more like a cross between a 3-point and if you were to cross over between a 3-point and a wheel landing. Or if you want to do a tailwheel landing for that matter, if you're doing some extreme backcountry stuff. So power idle, as soon as I know I can make it down to my point, okay? As the plane's coming on down, we're going to level off at 6 to 10 feet above the water. We're going to crack the throttle. I use the same thing in seaplanes as I do in a tailwheel. When you're doing the wheel landings or the rough water, in this case, crack the throttle. There's no specific RPM setting. If you're looking at your tachometer, you're looking at the wrong item. Get your eyes outside, crack the throttle to the first audible change in a power setting. All right, once you get that, that's going to give you more airflow over your elevator that allows you to have more elevator authority now, and you can hold the airplane off a lot longer, get that really high nose angle of attack. When you touch down, hopefully you can get it to a full stall. You're going to touch down really nose high, really slow. That does the least amount of damage to our airframe in this case. The faster you're moving when you hit these larger waves, the more damage you're going to have to your frame. Glassy water. I said in the beginning, glassy water is the most deadly conditions in all of seaplane flying. All right. About 90% of your serious accidents in seaplanes do result from glassy water conditions. All right. Glassy water is essentially when, if you look down at any body of water and you see a reflection on it, that's considered glassy to me. Some people will push that and they'll say if they see any disturbances at all that it's not glassy anymore. Personally, I don't cut it. I'd rather play it safe in this case. And if I see reflections, if I see the clouds down on the water or the trees on the shoreline, that's glassy water. Okay. Our concerns with it, when you have glassy water, it's kind of like landing on a mirror, literally, and you lose all of your depth perception over top of that body of water. So how do you know what 6 to 10 feet is above the water to level off if you have no idea how high you are? It's impossible. So it's a couple different techniques, and honestly, hang on just a second. So honestly, depending on where you learned to fly seaplanes or where you learned to fly seaplanes, they'll teach it a little bit different. Johnny, did they teach you parallel approaches or did you do LVR approaches? Do you remember?
I don't know what they called it, but they basically, you come down to the tree line, and then at the tree line, you got a kind of a visual concept of where the surface is, and that's where you transition into the nose up and then reduce the power.
Sure. So did you go parallel to the trees or did you go over top of the trees?
Parallel.
Parallel, yeah. So you did the parallel approach. That's typically what you're going to do up north because you don't have. When you think down in Florida, it's all swamp water and stuff, and you can come in over some marshes and set it up without having to go parallel to the trees there. Up north, that's not really an option, obviously. You got tall pine trees and stuff lining all your lakes. What are you going to do? You yourself up over top of those. So anyways, so glassy water, the approach is your takeoff distance is tripled, excuse me. Glassy water, you don't have any gap in those waves. You don't get that assistance in terms of breaking the surface tension with your float. So you end up increasing your takeoff distance by a significant number. I say at least tripled. Sometimes it's more than that, depending on what you're flying and how much power you have. That was just a little video coming in over an LVR. That was down in Florida, once again in the Cub, and coming over top of shoreline, setting up your pitch. And if you could see, let me see if I can pause it somewhere on here. That's a good position right there. If you look at that picture, try and judge your depth perception off of that right there. Pretty much impossible. I mean, you could not tell how high you are right there. You could be 500 feet over a really large body of water, or you could be 10 feet up over something smaller. That's a really tough one there. And that truly, that picture right there is a good example of the dangers of that glassy water. Glassy water takeoff. There's not a ton we can do to change it, but there's only one specific technical difference between a glassy water takeoff and a normal takeoff. Once you get up and on top of the water on the step where you're accelerating now, at this point, with the glassy water, it literally sucks you down into it. So the only thing we can really do to break that surface tension is we're going to apply aileron. We're actually going to do slight little turn to the takeoff. So what we're going to do, we always go left. Left is your most efficient turn in terms of aileron, right? You already have your left turning tendencies. The airplane wants to go that way already. By applying left aileron, you're going to get your right float out of the water first, okay? That right float breaking that surface tension, you now have half the amount of drag that you started out with, okay? At that time, you literally will feel the airplane jolt forward and lift right off. It is you know, one of the only things you can do. If you were to not get that right float out of the water, honestly, you're going to sit on that water for miles before you end up off. So glassy water takeoff. It's a fun one because you get to turn, you know, add some aileron and pop off on one wheel. It's always fun to do that. Or one float, excuse me. Glassy water landing. This is where the technique differences change based off of where you're doing it and what you have available to you. And Johnny, I'll show you why. We'll explain why the shoreline option down in Florida, if it's available to you, is actually the safest way to do it. But it is depending on what you have available to you. So what you're looking for in terms of an LVR, the way that I teach it, initially anyways, is you're looking for a flat area of shoreline. Something you can come over top of, say a grassy area, if you have a field running up to your shoreline, or even just low trees. If you can get some really low trees, that'll work as well. And you're gonna come and set yourself up as though you're gonna land over top of those trees. You're gonna get down really close to that, excuse me, the shoreline. You're gonna get down as close as you can to that shoreline without hitting anything. And you're gonna set your pitch up to our normal attitude. I call it the glassy water attitude, whatever you want to call it, but we're going to set our pitch up to just the right attitude so that we know we're not going to nose the airplane over when we touch the water, okay? So it's just a slight nose up attitude. Once you set your pitch, I say pitch, then power, set your pitch, bleed off some airspeed, and then you're going to set your power. Unlike the rough water landing, this is a little bit more of a specific power setting you're looking for, and does vary depending on the plane you're in. You're going to set your power to whatever the setting is, and you're going to hold that pitch and control your descent with your power. If you feel your butt sink, once again, we have no depth perception, so we can't look down at the water and notice that we're sinking faster. Once you feel your butt sink, you're going to add a little bit of power. If you feel your butt rise, you're going to reduce the power by a little bit, but we are not going to change that pitch attitude. Eventually, if you had it set just right, you're going to hit the water. And when you do, it is power idle immediately to slow down the airplane and bring that stick aft to reduce the airplane's tendency to want to flip over there. All right. Now, the shoreline method versus the parallel method. The parallel method is basically the same exact concept, except for instead of coming over top of the shoreline, you're going to come down next to, say, this little markers or trees. You're going to come in next to the trees where you have parallel or where you have depth perception, set your pitch, set your power, and then glide on out from there until you hit the water. The reason why my shoreline method, in my mind, is the safest way to do it if it's an option is because if you think about where debris ends up on a lake or a body of water, typically the debris, trees, logs, whatever it is, dead items, whatever it is, they typically build up on the shoreline, not out in the center of the lake. So if you set your pitch and you do this landing right next to the shoreline, you have a much greater chance of hitting something, whether it's a dock or that debris there. By doing the shoreline approach, you end up touching down somewhere out in the middle of the lake, and you end up with a much safer landing. Where you know you're not going to hit, or at least you have a smaller chance of hitting any debris out there. All right, here's another video of glassy water. This one I actually did a parallel approach in this little canal down here. So anyways, that's not a great filmed video. It's used with an iPhone, but essentially that was a glassy water landing, parallel approach down through a canal there. Confined area takeoff. This is, in my mind, these are the most fun you can have in an airplane, I think, without, the use of aircraft carriers. It's a blast. It's the turning takeoff, a lot of people call it. All right. There's not many positions you can be in where you end up doing a 90-degree turn potentially through a takeoff. So if you think about a confined area, think about a lake, we can actually get a seaplane in a body of water that is so small we cannot get back off of it. We can land in, depending on your plane, typically less than 500 feet for most seaplanes, unless you get into something really large, typically less than 500 feet. But to take off in a seaplane, you're going to need at least double that. So you think about it from that perspective, we could easily get ourselves into this little pond right here. But how are we going to get off if we can't take off in a straight line? We don't have enough distance there. Okay. So what we're going to do for the confined area takeoff is we're actually going to position ourselves 90 degrees from the wind, a direct crosswind, if you can get there, that is, depending on the wind strength. From that crosswind position, we're going to initiate our takeoff roll and basically treat it as though we're doing a crosswind takeoff. Once you get up on the step and you're in that takeoff attitude up on top of the water, you can actually initiate a gentle left-hand turn. Once again, we always go left. That's your most efficient turn. The airplane wants to go left on its own. You hardly need any rudder. The airplane wants to weather vane and pull left with the tendencies. And you end up rolling out and lifting off. If it's done properly, you lift off right into the wind. At that time, you might have trees to clear still, or mountains, or cliffs, or wherever you are. You still have obstacles around your lake. Just because you can get off the water doesn't mean you're in the clear yet. So at that time, we're going to continue that left-hand turn. Once you lift off, continue that left-hand turn, even at those low altitudes, nice and gentle, left-hand turn, and follow your shoreline around the lake as you climb out. If you couldn't clear, say, trees on the side, you can at least clear this body of water. So as long as you're doing these spiraling climbing turns above the water, you're not going to run into anything. So climb out until you're clear of any obstacles, and then eventually you can fly on out. Once again, in my mind, the confined area takeoff is the most fun you can have in an airplane without being without the use of an aircraft carrier. It is truly a blast. And it really tests your skill too. Like I said, landing on a lake, knowing that you may not be able to take off in a straight line, also gets your adrenaline going too. So those are definitely fun. Traffic pattern. Traffic pattern in a seaplane. We still make, at least I do, I think it's super critical that we still make rectangular course around our lake. Okay. What we don't have is a runway. Okay, so how do we know what our traffic pattern is? How do we keep it square? Kind of going back to the first statement that I said, which was a bold one to make, that we are kind of like the potheads of the sky. Okay, we have to use our imagination in this case. All right, you have to establish or form a runway on your body of water in your mind. Picture it in your mind on that body of water, and use that for your reference around the lake. You can't clear an entire lake to make sure that it's safe to land, but you can clear what I call a lane, or landing lane. Okay, so pick your lane based off of the winds, the length of the lake, the shape of the lake, whatever it is. Pick your lane, form your lane, and then fly your rectangular course around it. Okay. The differences between this and a normal traffic pattern, other than that it's around water, your altitudes won't be consistent. They are going to change based off of where you are, what plane you're flying, what speed you're flying, what the obstacles are around you. Very rarely am I flying the exact same pattern altitude at every single body of water that I go to. It could be anywhere from 500 to 1,000 feet easily. Sometimes more, sometimes less. Like I said, it solely depends on what you're trying to do and where you are. The other kind of unique thing is you can make left or right traffic. There is nobody regulating that, right? If you're on a body of water, there's no standard traffic pattern at that body of water. So you make your own rules in terms of that. Left traffic or right traffic, I mean, go right if you need to. If there's obstacles on the left-hand side, why not go to the right side of the lake and make that, or left side, make right traffic. Yeah, it's up to you in terms of which traffic pattern to make. One thing I take into consideration is if there's any houses or neighborhoods or whatever it is around me, depending on where you're flying. Once again, if you're out in the backcountry, it does not matter. It's more or less obstacles in your way. But you're down in Florida or even up north in New Hampshire and Maine and stuff, you can find lakes with some neighborhoods around and stuff. So try to avoid the houses and neighborhoods. If there's somebody on the left-hand side, make right traffic and vice versa. No two approaches are ever going to be the same. Your power settings, you can start out with a standard power setting, but you're going to have to adjust that and be comfortable making adjustments with those power settings. It's not like a Cirrus where you have to do things precise every single time. I only say Cirrus because you guys are all the Smokehouse is the Cirrus group here. I've never seen so many Cirrus in my life. Everybody owns a Cirrus. It's awesome. But Cirrus, you fly it very precise though, right? And I know Bob over there in Leesburg teaches it that way, right? You hit your points and at your specific altitude, you got to get your flaps. This is not the case in a seaplane. It's always changing. You have to adjust on the fly and be comfortable with that. All right. Over here, I have the will not checklist, WLNOT. I call it will not. Okay. I use this in backcountry flying as well. I don't just use it in seaplane. I kind of adjust it for backcountry, but it is essentially, right, we don't have an airport. We don't have an ATIS, an AWAS, anything. We have to make our own airport environment and decide what the environment is telling us all on our own. So this checklist is simply just a few items to get you thinking properly in terms of how to safely approach that body of water. The first one, W, is wind and water conditions. Figure out, where's the wind coming from? Read that water. Which direction are the waves moving? The waves are always flowing with the wind. Your water conditions, how large are the waves? If there are larger waves, can you land farther upwind on the upwind side of the lake? Usually the waves are gonna be a little smaller on the upwind side of a lake or a river, whatever it is. Okay, landing lane. Once I've determined what my wind and water is doing, now I need to figure out what my runway is. I need to build my runway in my mind. Okay, so the landing lane, whether it's into the wind or if I should accept a crosswind to get a larger distance, then do so. That's what's kind of cool about this is we do get to make our own runway. We can land whatever. If we want to land into the wind, do it. If you don't want to, then don't. And is noise abatement. I keep that in mind. Once again, coming from Florida, we fly over lake, populated lakes and stuff. But then when I go fly up north and stuff, obviously, noise abatement is not an issue in remote Alaska. So nobody up there to care. Obstructions. Do I have any towers or anything? More importantly, I guess obstructions is more importantly within my landing lane. Now that I've chosen that lane, is there any debris? Is there any trees, fallen limbs, whatever it is, logs floating in there? Animals? You might have some sort of big birds or something, or down in Florida, alligators. You can hit alligators. Don't ask me how I know it, but they turn upside down real quick. So watch out for the obstructions. And the last T on the will not checklist is terrain, traffic, and towers. You're building your left or right traffic pattern based off of all of these items here now. Is there any terrain on the left-hand side? Should I go right? Traffic? Is there any other airplanes out here or whatever it is? And even you'd be surprised, you can go to some of these remote places up in Alaska and stuff, and you'd be surprised, especially if there's some popular lakes, you could go out there and be one of 20 planes out on that lake. So, and you could be out in the middle of nowhere and all of a sudden find 20 airplanes around you. So definitely be looking out for that no matter where you are. All right. Parking a seaplane. So we've mastered the flying part. We're down to the parking part now. All right. How do we get it back to the shoreline now? Once again, this goes back to what I was saying earlier of taxiing a seaplane, the water work. When you're down on the water, this is the hardest part of a seaplane. Johnny, did you do any docking?
Yeah, all we did was docking, and they did teach me how to beach it on some off lakes that we went to.
Sure.
The home base was all dock,
Sure.
and it was
So,
in a confined area because it was up in a little creek.
yeah. So how challenging was that docking, and how nerve-wracking was it on your first time getting up in there?
It wasn't too bad the first couple of times, and then one time I came in by myself solo.
Yeah.
And I made a perfect approach to the dock.
Yeah.
Perfect approach angle and speed. And I went to throw the seat back to get out, to jump out on the float and jump off on the dock, and the seat locked up and I couldn't get my knees across to get out the door. And I floated right on past the dock. And I had to fire the engine up, do a U-turn and circle back around for another try.
That's
That
good.
time I got the seat back, and then I was sitting on the front edge of the seat when I came up for the docking attempt on that one.
That's right. That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, docking can, especially by yourself, is probably, I said the glassy water is probably 90% of your serious accidents in aviation. Of the not serious, in seaplanes, of the not serious accidents, I'd say docking is probably 100% of it. This is where people start hitting things, or it's very easy to, especially in a Cessna, right, or a plane where you're side by side, not tandem like a Cub. If you're docking and you need to dock on the right-hand side of the airplane, it is really tough to tell where that float is.
Yeah.
And a lot of people end up hitting that right float, especially is the most common one, is right float right into the dock there. And so
I switched seats.
That's right. Switch seat. Exactly. Switch seats. And I always say, get everything out of the way well before you start getting to that dock. When you're still a minute plus away from docking the plane, get your headset off, get your seat back, get your knee board off, get the door already opened and hold it open with one of your hands. Be ready to get out of that plane, because it happens quick. And if you miss the dock, you miss it, right? Sometimes you can't.
Exactly.
You don't always have enough room to turn back around and try it again. Sometimes you might hit something else in front of you.
I had wind issues when I missed at one point, not when I missed, but when I came into dock one time, I had wind issues and I couldn't turn the plane around. I had to sail it back out into the channel to make the second attempt.
There you go. There you
Power
go.
down and use the doors and the ailerons and the elevator to sail it back out into the center of the channel where I could fire it up and bring it back in under power.
There you go. Using that sailing. Sailing comes in handy. It's funny. I don't have a slide on it, unfortunately, but sailing is one of those things. I did have a slide. Did have a slide on sailing. No longer here. I lost about all of my presentation last night, so I ended up having to read this presentation was made overnight, guys. I got home last night and my computer crapped out on me. Had to reboot it. When it came back, all I had left was my title slide. I had about 70 slides on here and all gone. So it was a fun night last night and this morning. So anyways, but yeah, sailing, that's awesome. You get to use sailing, because sailing is one of those things where, you practice it and you're like, when am I ever going to actually use that? I'm always going to have an engine or whatever,
I've had to use it a couple of times.
Exactly. And then you end up in those emergencies where you're like, I don't know what else to do.
Right.
Yeah. If you lose an engine, you end up on the center of the lake. How do you get out to how do you get back to the shoreline? You sail it, literally.
And where you want to be.
Exactly. Now docking, you'll see I have downwind, base, and final. That is actually intentional wording. I'm not just using those words to pretend like you're on a downwind. You should actually be downwind. In other words, when you're docking a seaplane, you always want the wind at your face coming into that dock, if you can. There are definitely situations where you end up with a pretty strong crosswind on you, and there's only so much you can do. However, as best you can, get a headwind on you. That gives you the slowest speed as you're coming up to that dock. What you'll find is if you end up with a tailwind on you, and even at idle, say you got a 5-knot tailwind on you, you might end up be doing 6-7 miles an hour as you approach that dock, which could get a little bit hairy, especially when you're talking about docking it by yourself, and you got to jump out of the seat onto the float, then from the float onto the dock, hope you don't miss, and then tie it off all in that time before the plane gets away. So docking, definitely challenging. Make sure you have a headwind coming to that dock as best you can. Finally, ramping and beaching. Literally, it's about as easy as it comes. There's nothing to it. Hit it. Make sure you hit whatever you're aiming at. Cut your power and drift in if you can. If you have a strong headwind and you need to carry that power in until you hit the beach or a ramp, a boat ramp, whatever you're using, then do so. But for the most part, if you've got a buddy there to catch you, cut the power out a little ways and just drift in if you can. Same thing with the docking. Cut your power a little ways out before you end up coming in. Try and drift it in as best you can. With the ramping and beaching, it's even more so important, especially if you think about going to some beaches. There's other people there. I've had it happen where you're pulling up to a beach and you're like the coolest person in the world because you have an airplane at a beach right now. And people want to run up and help you. That's like that's my biggest pet peeve is you always get these guys that want to help you and be the helping hand. Like, yeah, I've worked on boats before. I know how to tie a knot on your mooring cleat, and they run up to you, but your propeller's still running. You planned on doing it by yourself and kind of stick it to the beach. And so you got to be really careful about that. People love airplanes, and anytime they can get close to it, they will. So always anticipate cutting that power. Stop that propeller from spinning. There's too many stories of guys with missing limbs out there because they're from hand propping or in seaplanes as well. So they end up falling forward from the float. They get their arms cut off, or even worse than just their arms, and it's pretty bad. And I think that is the end of it. I apologize for some of the dull slides and some of the things missing, such as sailing. Another thing that would have liked to have had at one point was reading the winds too. Reading the winds on the waters is a challenging thing. Anybody that has flown seaplanes, Johnny might be able to attest to this. But on calm days, less than about 6 or 7 knots of wind, reading that wind on the water is very, very challenging. And so that. It all comes back to the wind is what you're going to find in seaplane flying is it all comes back to the wind. The sooner you can learn to use the wind to your advantage, make it your friend, the better you'll be as a seaplane pilot. So thanks for listening to my rants and my lectures, and hopefully nobody got too bored. But yeah.
This is awesome, man. Thank you so much for doing this and for putting, I know you went through a lot of stress last night and the past few days to recreate your presentation, but well done. Again, thank you very much. Are you cool with a few questions that we've got in the chat?
Absolutely. Hang on a second. How do I get out of the screen share here?
I can pull it down for you.
Here we go.
There we go. Cool. So what I'm going to do is kind of start back up from the top. And I did step away for about 7 or 8 minutes, but Mike Wolpel had asked, is there a difference between the check ride for private and commercial?
There actually is not. In terms of the actual maneuvers you're going to perform on your check ride, there is no difference between private and commercial, which is unique, and it's one of the only check rides that is that way. The only thing they might change, depending on your examiner, is they might change up some of the oral questions. You might get some questions based off of which you should be fine with, Mike, being that you just passed your commercial check ride. But you might get some oral questions on common carriage versus private carriage and all that stuff. But for the most part, there is no difference though.
Cool. And Brent had asked, do you use flaps for takeoff? And you may have, I don't know if you covered that.
Yes, I did not. And mainly because a lot of it varies from plane to plane. You very rarely, I have not flown a seaplane yet where you could lift off with full flaps, even if you tried. There's too much drag between the water and the flaps. It actually won't lift off with the full flaps. If it does lift off, it's not going to be a good one. So typically less flaps is better. But yeah, certainly if your plane calls for it, a lot of the seaplanes, you know, 180s, Super Cubs, 185s, even 172s, their manuals, the airplane manuals actually have seaplane sections in them where you can actually, you know, read and figure out exact, you know, how to perform a normal takeoff in your particular plane. But absolutely, you do use flaps. And it does depend. If you're doing a normal takeoff, most of the seaplanes I'll fly, it's usually first notch of flaps for a normal takeoff. If we have flaps anyways, once again, back to the I've got too many hours in a J3 Cub with no flaps. But you know, when I'm flying a plane that does have a seaplane that does have flaps, typically it's first notch of flaps for a normal takeoff, 2 notches of flaps for a rough water takeoff. That'll just help you pop up in the air real quick. Never full flaps on a takeoff. And then on a landing, once again, very rarely am I going to use full flaps on a landing with a seaplane. There's really no use for it. So yeah.
Cool. Makes sense. And this is an interesting one. Do you need to know swimming? Do you need to know how to swim in order to get a seaplane license? And I was going to ask, do you need to, especially in Florida, know how to wrestle alligators? Like, if you've hit an alligator, I'm like, to me, the worst thing you could possibly do is flip a plane in the water and find yourself, you know, nose to nose with an alligator. So,
yeah, right. Yeah. No, I actually taught a gentleman, this will be even more of a surprise, but I taught a gentleman a couple years ago, seaplanes, and he was Jamaican and didn't know how to fly, or didn't know how to swim, excuse me. And his biggest fear was falling in the water. I mean, like when we were getting in the plane, he was so nervous getting in the plane. Once we were in it, he was all right, but yeah, he did not know how to swim. So it's not a requirement. Obviously, I would highly recommend having some sort of swimming skills. You never know, emergencies, you know, things happen. I've seen enough people go in the water. I very, you know, knock on wood, haven't had anything happen where I was in the water other than, you know, trying to dock and missing a step or something, ending up in the water, which happens to the best of us after a while. It happens to everybody. You eventually fall in the water. That's kind of the joke is you're not a true seaplane pilot till you've fallen in, till you've gotten wet. But you know, yeah, to answer your question, not a requirement. That's a good question. Not a requirement. I've never seen that asked on a check ride before, although it probably should be, thinking about it.
Yeah, that is a good question. I never actually had thought about that. But
Yeah.
so who has the right of way, a boat or a plane? This is
So generally speaking, the right of way rules, the way they apply is that everybody else, doesn't matter whether it's a plane, a boat, a kayak, a jet ski, I don't care, a floaty out there, they have the right of way over an airplane. The mindset behind that is we have the ability to be in the air or on the water. So you think about it from a landing perspective. If I'm coming in for a landing and there's a boater in my way, I can always go around and try again. And so that's where the mindset came in for everybody else has the right of way over you. So when it comes to, you know, right of way rules between vessels on the water, and we are a vessel when we're on the water, technically, we are a boat. So being that we are a vessel on the water, the right of way rules only actually apply to seaplanes because boaters and everybody else does have the right of way over us. So you're talking about, you know, whoever's on the right side of you, the person on the right side has the right of way. They get to go ahead. The person on the left has to give in. If you're head on, right, go around to the right. Whatever the right of way rule is, it really only applies between seaplanes because a boater is always going to have the right of way over top of you.
Got it. That makes sense. Makes a lot of sense. Here's a good one from Tom. Aside from obstructions, adequate landing area, etc., are there any restrictions, FAA or otherwise, where you can land a seaplane?
Yes. So it varies. Believe it or not, it varies. Each state is different. Colorado, for instance, the state of Colorado bans seaplane flying. You cannot land a seaplane on any body of water in the state of Colorado legally. So it does vary state by state. Now I know there's a group out there called Seaplane Pilots Association, SPA. And they have, if you're a member, you get it used to be a book, now it's all electronic, it's an app, but it's essentially the Seaplane Landing Directory. And it's a directory of all the lakes in the United States, or any body of water, I should say, in the United States, and can you land on it or can you not? And they're doing the best they can to compile it. There's obviously a lot of bodies of water and they can't possibly cover all of them. But that is how you would know what you can land on and where you can land, is with that Seaplane Pilots, the landing directory. In a state like Florida, I believe Maine as well, Alaska, Washington's pretty good about it. There's a few states out there where virtually any public body of water you can land on. If you can drive a boat on it, you can also land an airplane on it. So,
Got it.
yeah.
Yeah, like that video you showed just a minute ago with you landing in a canal, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. I was just like, that's incredible when you think about it. It's just so tight of a space.
Yeah.
I mean, you'll be really, really on your game for something like that, right?
Well, I'm also in a J3 Cub, so it's not a wide wingspan, and it's not going too fast. So you can always control it a lot better. I probably wouldn't land, anything a whole lot bigger on something like that. But yeah, that was probably. I mean, you say it was narrow. It was probably 50 feet wide at least. So
yeah, true, right.
It looks a lot worse than it actually is. It always does. Whenever you get into those real small strips, you always look at it from the air and you're like, holy crap, I got to land on that. And then you get down and you're like, oh, it wasn't that bad. 40 feet, that's easy.
Right.
So.
Let's see. I don't have any other thing in the chat here. We do have, some folks still online. So if you have a question, feel free to ask away. But Michael, this has been great. I've learned a ton. I've never been in a seaplane. I would love to do that at some point. And considering I learned how to fly in Florida, I'm surprised I never did.
Yeah, right. Well, if you ever end up back down that way, go to Jack Brown's, or I'll take you to Jack Brown's. We'll go have fun with it. Yeah,
that would be cool. That'd be really cool.
Something. Yeah, it's a blast, honestly. If those that have not experienced seaplane flying yet, it is about as fun as you can get in an airplane, honestly.
Yeah, it's you and I were talking about this on the podcast. It was like, you put floats on an airplane. You're like, that's not like normal.
No, it's not natural, honestly. It's and when you're in the plane, you also it doesn't feel totally natural. You definitely have a lot more of a nature opposing you. And that's definitely the biggest challenge for sure is dealing with that. So it is very interesting. But it is a blast though. Once you can, it goes down to like I was telling you on that podcast as well, is it goes down or boils down to when you're flying this style of flying, backcountry and bush flying, things like that. You really are, you need to be not just one with the airplane, but also one with the nature. You have to it's not, yes, you don't have the numbers that you might have in the airlines. I mean, I'm an airline pilot as well, so I know how to fly via numbers, but what you have to do is take different set of information and make your solid judgment on how best to approach something. It's just based off of different information. It's not necessarily strict and hard numbers. It's just a different set of information. So you can fly it the same as you'd fly the airlines in terms of using all of your available information and making the best decisions still.
Mm-hmm.
So
right, that makes sense. We have a few more in chat came in actually. So let's start with this one. what is involved with adding Seaplane to your private?
So to get Seaplane rating from your private, or to get private for a private add-on. I'm sorry, I'm reading the question here now too.
Yeah, can you cover what's involved with adding SES to the private SEL?
Yeah, so it depends on where you do that. You go down to Browns, and I'm not, I don't work there anymore. I promise I'm not not a representative of Browns right now. But there's a lot of Seaplane schools out there that do something similar. Where it's usually just a 2-day course. Actually, it's very easy. Minimum legally 3 hours with an instructor. That's for any rating, any added rating, excuse me. Minimum of 3 hours with an instructor, and then a check ride. And that's really it. You have to do, it's been a show that you can be proficient or safe in particularly glassy water landings and takeoffs, but really all three of the main things. They'll run you through on the check ride. It's an oral based off of kind of what we talked about today, mixed with some regulations, which I would have liked to have talked a little bit about, but don't have that slide. So, essentially, day one, you're going to start going through your normal day, your normal operations into probably rough water and a little bit of glassy. That's usually your first day, depending on at most places you go to. Excuse me. Day two, they're usually going to start getting into glassy and confined. The more advanced things, and then eventually you end up with the check rides really next. Honestly, there's not that much to it. So to answer your question, 5 hours of flight time and is average. It can be done in less, it can be done in more. It just depends on you. But I definitely recommend looking at those 2-day courses. They're awesome for it. If you just want to do it for fun, say you have it and be able to go up to Alaska and rent a seaplane for a day or something, definitely recommend going to one of those places that do it in just a couple of days for sure.
Cool, that's awesome. Thank you. And again, we have still a question in the chat, but I wanted to. We have one on Facebook Facebook Live as well.
Yeah.
Brent has a question on question concerning the CFI. Brent, if you're still online, looks like you are. I don't know if you can hear me or not.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Gotcha.
Yeah, Michael, actually I came across this and I was kind of scared when I saw it. But if I'm a CFI single engine land, if I get my float plane rating, am I grandfathered in as a CFI?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So if you look, so you are CFI, correct?
Yes.
So if you look at your license, it actually says on your CFI license, it says single engine airplane. It does not say single engine land or single engine sea. It just says single engine airplane. So what that means is it's tied to whatever commercial privileges you have. So if you have single engine airplane commercial privileges of single engine sea, you can now legally teach single engine sea with just 5 hours of seaplane time. I don't necessarily highly recommend teaching somebody with 5 hours of experience in something, but yeah, dude, it's actually pretty lenient in terms of that. There's no separate check ride for getting your CFI. It is tied to whatever commercial privileges you have.
Yeah. So when I saw that, I was like, surely that can't be true.
Well, so but if you actually dig into the regs a little bit more, what it does say is you need 15 hours in that category of airplane. I think it's category, might even be type actually.
Category and type. Yep.
Yeah. There you go. So you have to have 15 hours in that category and type just to even teach in it. So yes, you could technically be a CFI at 5 hours, but you can't actually teach to get a little more experience. So
okay.
A little bit of protection, but yeah, no, it's kind of scary. I remember signing off people for their commercial, knowing that they were CFIs and that they could literally go tomorrow and start teaching people, and it was always a scary feeling with that.
I think sometimes insurance is a good fence.
Yeah, that's right, exactly.
And Michael, what kind of commercial flying do you do?
I actually just got furloughed about a month ago now, but I'm an airline pilot.
For who?
PSA Airlines.
And what kind of airplanes?
ERJ for American Eagle.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Well, that's okay. We'll see if this vaccine that was that yesterday, the first one got administered. We'll see if this helps us any. I don't know.
Yeah,
not
I'm
putting it but
I'm hoping we come back with a vengeance.
that's right. We'll see. Are you an airline pilot as well?
Yeah, I'm a captain for Southwest.
Awesome. I worked at Southwest when I was 18. I was a little rampaging at Dulles actually here in Virginia.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's who I was telling you about, Michael, is Brent.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome.
That's cool. Any other things, Brent, for you?
No, I'm good.
Hey, thanks for joining us tonight. It's great to see you.
Yeah, this was awesome. I'm definitely gonna. So my wife was like, "I'm trying to surprise you, but I have to include you." And there's this flight school up in Alaska, and you get your float plane rating. And I'm like, yeah, just you need to say no more.
That's awesome. Do you know which school it was up there?
I don't recall, but I'll reach out to you.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, absolutely. There's a bunch. I mean, they're everywhere up there, but there's some good ones right out of Anchorage too. Some of them are world class places too. But definitely recommend that in the summertime. I don't know that they're flying in February is going to be a good time to be to be flying up there, or at least learning how to fly up there.
Exactly.
No, that's cool.
Awesome.
Well, I just want to ask, we got 2 more questions and then we'll round it out if that's cool with you, Michael, and everybody else. This one's actually from over on Facebook Live, and I want to wrap this in because I think it's a really interesting question. And this is for Michael, for you, top lessons learned, experience earned in your aviation journey, considering the fact that you are airline, you are, flying backcountry and seaplanes and J3 Cubs. What are the top lessons learned and experiences that stand out in your mind? This person that's asking this is a former Florida pilot. And he said that he's always been beat up by those ocean crosswinds. So you've got somebody over on Facebook that's asking that, rather general question, but I think it's a great one to ask.
No, that's a great question. It's a little bit of a loaded question, but it's a great question. So I think that mixing the two, at least in terms of, keep it somewhat relevant to the topic, mixing the two between the commercial flying and the backcountry bush kind of stuff. The biggest lesson is that I've learned, I would say, is know your airplane. I think is number one. There's been too many situations where somebody was in an airplane and didn't quite know the limitations of the plane or didn't know the systems of the airplane. When something goes wrong, I think there's a lot of, and I, talking to a bunch of serious guys, I don't want to start talking about the parachute issue, but I think it's important to understand why something is happening in an airplane. What is happening, why is it happening? And then you can usually, I would say 9 times out of 10, you can solve that problem without needing to even declare an emergency for that matter. 9 times out of 10, you can usually fix an issue in your airplane. That would be number one. Number two is don't get complacent. I've lost too many friends, multiple friends anyways, for that matter. One of them being one of my greatest mentors, I'd say, in aviation. He flying an airplane down in Central Florida called a CB, twin engine CB. If you guys aren't familiar with a CB, it's one of the ugliest airplanes you will ever find, yet also beautiful at the same time. It looks like a basketball with wings. Okay. Not aerodynamic, ton of drag. And this gentleman was flying out of Winter Haven. It was a crash, happened about 1.5 years, almost 2 years ago now. And he was probably the most experienced person in this type of aircraft in the world. He had thousands and thousands of hours in this airplane. He was teaching a student, and they did a simulated engine failure at very low altitudes, which any of us that are CFIs know that, especially MEIs, know that practicing single engine maneuvers or work at low altitudes is always a risk, and you should really never push that, even if it's just simulated. Well, he ended up pulling the engine at about 50 feet, and that particular airplane had an issue with one of the engines. The one that he pulled back auto-feathered on him. So he lost his engine at 50 feet in an airplane that does not climb onto engines, ended up upside down in a house in a neighborhood just off the side of the field. And he tried stretching his glide distance simply to make it to water because he didn't want to end up in that neighborhood. The CB is a seaplane. Tried to make it to water and he couldn't. Ended up in a stall spin in a house. And once again, it goes back to he was one of the most experienced pilots in that airplane. I mean, in the world. But all it took was that one time that he got complacent and got too comfortable in the airplane. And it goes back to kind of the conversation Gabe and I had in our podcast about pushing. What were we talking about, Gabe? We were talking about like pushing limits and you're talking about your first experience flying, right? And your spins and yes, I think that you need to be comfortable in your airplane. So to tie the first lesson I've learned or whatever with this one here, be comfortable in your airplane, but don't be so comfortable that you're complacent. You should always have a healthy respect for the machine you're flying and you're operating, have a healthy respect for aerodynamics and physics, and don't be afraid of spins, but also understand them and know how to get yourself out of them, things like that. And I would say that, in my mind, those are the two largest things that I've learned in my experience is, bouncing from bush to airlines and back and forth. It's definitely know your airplane, but don't get complacent in the plane.
Yeah, and that's what I've learned, over the past month and a half of learning more about you. It's pretty cool that you can literally, have these different ways of flying, and you're one with that airplane, figuring it out and knowing that plane so well. And it's impressive, depending on whether you're flying a jet or a J3 Cub.
Yes.
By the way, that was from Reed, and he is going to be coming back down this way soon, and he said he's going to check out your flight school. He wants to go in that J3. So
awesome. Love to take you up, Reed.
So what I want to do is round it out here. And again, thank you for your time and all of your expertise here and your sharing your knowledge, and for everyone asking questions. There is a question that I think kind of ties up to this conclusion for tonight, which is, are you looking to provide backcountry flying within our area, within the Shenandoah area and things like that? And so with that said, perhaps you can share with us a little bit more about the flight school, what you are looking to do, and then how it is that we can connect with you along the way.
Absolutely. So I have, for the time being, I have a J3 Cub. It's my only plane. I'm out in Martinsburg. I've got my wonderful wood paneled office out here, and a J3 Cub in my hangar. And that is, the whole vision of this school came about when I found out I was going to get furloughed. I decided I wanted to get back into, I kind of saw it as a sign to get back into what I love and my true passion in aviation, which is instructing, but with a heavy emphasis on the backcountry side of things, whether it's tailwheel or seaplanes. And so J3 Cub, in my mind, is the greatest trainer in terms of tailwheel. It teaches you how to be on your toes at all times. It keeps you humble, and it is also simple, and you can fly it by feel and focus on feeling. But in terms of carrying that into backcountry, with that being said, my J3 Cub is not the greatest backcountry plane. I can land in some really small strips, but it's not necessarily great at getting in and out of super tight confined areas. So, or for that matter, in a 75-year-old airframe isn't exactly great at landing on like literally on a farm, which I do have some farms out in West Virginia that I'm working with, that I'm working on setting up a more established course on backcountry. For the time being, I do have a backcountry course on my website. It's on my website. It's 3 hours of flight time, couple hours of ground. We'll talk about backcountry techniques, what I'm thinking about in my head when I'm going out to these, remote areas, how to break apart a field and determine, how to land on a field that doesn't even have a runway on it. And then we'll go out and we'll fly to some smaller grass strips out here in the area and really have some fun and kind of put it to some use. In the future, I'd love, my next step is getting a second airplane, and I'd love to have something, more in the backcountry realm. whether it be, something simple just as a super cub, or even going up into something a little bit more beefy and 180, 185 or something. So I definitely plan on expanding on all of that. And I think that is what, without making this a sales pitch, what makes me different from other tailwheel schools is that I do have, I'm not just going to teach you how to fly a tailwheel airplane. I'm going to teach you, even if you come out for the tailwheel course, I'm going to teach you backcountry techniques and incorporate that into our course. It's not going to be your basic, land on asphalt the entire time and keep things standard. We're going to have fun with it. We're going to go out and make it more backcountry oriented. So to answer your question, I'm already doing backcountry stuff in the area, and I plan on doing even more of it in the future.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, I have to say, like I said, at the beginning of the call, jumping in that J3 Cub with you the very first time, being in one, and popping around down by the rivers and things like that, the experience that you provided in addition to the instruction, I mean, it was incredible. I mean, I still tell all my friends who aren't pilots, and they look at the pictures that we took and they're like, seriously? I'm like, yep, that was it. So I think it's awesome. I mean, you definitely have a very good niche, and I think it's impressive. So any other things that anybody wants to add before we wrap it up here? Well, good deal. Well, Michael, it's been a pleasure working with you on this. And again, great job, pulling yourself back up through on the presentation. It was fantastic, great information. Where can people find you? What's the best way to find you?
Yeah, so I've got website set up, and it's flyshenandoah.com. You can just search Shenandoah Tail Adventures as well. I've got Facebook. I've got everything except for Twitter. I'm not a big Twitter guy. But look me up online. Check out what I've got on my website. Check out my Facebook page. And one thing that I am starting up right now is trying to get more into the virtual side of things, and so I'm starting up kind of adventure courses. Adventure Academy is the name of it. It's kind of what this is kind of the intro to that. It's my first one, and I'll be working with some other really good CFIs that have niches, I would say. Whether it be airline guys or even more bush-oriented guys than me, military guys, and teaching kind of like master classes in aviation, and kind of with a heavy focus on different topics and things like that. And so if anybody's interested in that, definitely look it up on the website as well. And so yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put this right here in the chat for Rico. He wanted that as well. It is Michael is part of Smokehouse as well. So if you have questions, I mean, I'm sure you can reach out through that as well. So whatever you guys need.
Yeah, friend request, whatever.
Let's give a virtual round of applause. I know it looks like Johnny's still with us on the camera. Michael, thank you so much. I look forward to connecting with you again. I hope everybody stays safe tomorrow if you are in the Virginia area. It sounds like we may or may not have some snow depending on where you're at. The last thing I would say is we have another session coming up on the 22nd. I believe it's the 22nd, with a gentleman who, his name is Kerry Bacali. He had an emergency over top the Atlantic. He's a ferry pilot. So that's coming up, I think, next week. So if you guys want to tune in on that, you could check it out on Facebook.
I actually ran into him incidentally about a year or two ago now down in Florida. I did a little test flight on his plane before he flew it across the Atlantic.
No way, really?
I didn't even realize it until you posted that thing on Smokehouse about it, and I was looking at that guy looks so familiar to me. Ended up texting my buddy that owns the ferry company that he was working with down there. He goes, "Yeah, that's the guy." I'm like, "That's crazy." So
yeah, that's what, I mean, hey, that's what GA is all about, right? I mean,
don't piss anybody off. That's lesson number 3 out there, guys. Don't piss anybody off because it comes back to bite you real quick.
Yeah, that is a fact. Hey, everyone, have a great night. Thank you for joining us, and be safe out there. We'll talk to you soon. All right.
Bye.
Take care.